All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Scott Bradley, and I'm the Executive Director of your Thunder Bay Historical Museum Society. I want to extend my thanks to everyone joining us this evening, both here in person and those joining us on Zoom. I want to start by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe peoples on the lands of Fort William First Nation, signatory to the Robinson-Superior Treaty of 1850. We also recognize the historic and ongoing contributions of the Métis people of this region. For thousands of years, this land, along the shores of Gitchagami, has been a place of gathering, trade, learning, and stewardship. These connections continue today, and it is our responsibility to honor them. This acknowledgement is not a simple formality. It serves as a reminder of my personal and our collective duty to learn from the truth of our shared history, to listen to Indigenous voices, and to respect the sovereignty and self-determination of Indigenous nations. In our work and daily lives, we commit to building relationships based on trust, respect, and reciprocity. We pledge to ensure our spaces and programs reflect diversity, resilience, and knowledge of Indigenous peoples. And we vow to uphold these responsibilities, not just in words, but through ongoing actions. At this time, I'd like to share a few housekeeping notes before we begin tonight's program. This lecture is being recorded, so try not to cheer in the middle. Also, for those joining online, we cannot hear you. There will be refreshments brought up in a little while. We are going to hold off on questions and answers until the end, and I will have a microphone to bring around to you so that those online can hear the questions clearly. I'd also like to recognize the Department of History at Lakehead University as the sponsor of tonight's lecture. And I would like to acknowledge some distinguished guests joining us for this evening's lecture. Joining us is Todd Miller, Thunder Bay-based historian and recent lecturer for the Society. Thanks for being here. Also, Ron Lee Cam, director of the Dewdrop Inn. Are you here? Yeah, there he is. Thank you for being here. Also joining us this evening is Thunder Bay Historical Museum Society Board of Directors Secretary Dale Willis, also Director Jeff Mundy, and past president of the Society Mark Chocla. So before I get into the official program, I would like to inform you that our speaker is from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Well, there is, to say at least, considerable violence and turmoil in that city that may be of interest to attendees. I kindly request that questions related to that be held off until the conclusion of the presentation, and so we can keep the questions about tonight's lecture confined to this topic.
Can we welcome him and say you are welcome here?
Thank you. That's great.
So our speaker would be willing to address questions concerning those tragic events currently unfolding in the city after the proceedings and after the microphone's turned off.
Yeah.
So our speaker tonight, who graciously traveled here to present, is Joe Piwoschuk, a retired safety investigator and by trade and by inclination an avid traveler and an independent and curious history researcher. He first encountered the story of Silver Islet in 1974 while backpacking on Sibley Peninsula, today's Sleeping Giant. And the place stayed with him for decades. In 2022, he returned to the topic in earnest, digging into the mine's discovery, operation, and decline to share a fresh, research-driven perspective on one of Lake Superior's most remarkable industrial histories. Please give me a warm welcome.
Thank you, Scott. Is this on okay? Everybody can hear me okay? Okay. All right. Yeah. So my name is Joe Piwoschuk, as Scott said, and I have had many travel opportunities. I think we're bumping almost 60 countries we've been to, but there's something about this place that keeps me coming back. And I mentioned in 1974, I came here for the first time and to do a little backpacking. And see here. Oh, it's not going. Scott? Oh, okay.
All right, here we go now.
Nope. Nope.
All right, plug in for you. There you go.
Okay, there we go. So backpacking, like I say, the Sibley Peninsula. And for the past 4 years, I've been haunting the Thunder Bay Library, the museum, the Lakehead University Library, and the Silver Islet General Store. For some reason, I've just been fascinated about this history and the engineering feats. And the more you dig into it, the more little nuggets you find that are like, wow, that's really interesting. And I have read a lot of things. I've got probably all the books ever written about Silver Islet. I've looked at like what's the local magazine, the Walleye. I've got the Walleye articles, stuff like that, and kind of put it all together. But now I do need to tell you that I'm not a historian, okay? I'm a retired safety guy, so I don't want to offend any historians out there. Okay, like I said, I first learned about 1974. There I am when I was young and tough. I'm still old and tough, but in fact, I broke my wrist yesterday and had a chance to check out the Thunder Bay Hospital, which did a marvelous job, marvelous job. Fixed me right up, 3 hours, I was out the door. So yeah, so I was happy to see that.
Yeah.
Well, you think so? Maybe. Okay. So we're talking about a mine that closed 150 years ago. That's a long time. And look at the people that are here. Okay. A few empty seats, but a lot of people. Why are people interested in this? Why am I interested in this? I don't know. It's better than internet gambling, I suppose. But basically, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about finding the silver, trying to get to the silver mine, significant mining issues, why they were mining. We're going to talk about mining life. We're going to talk about life in town. We're going to talk about what happened to the mine and a little bit into the 19th century up into the present. So first of all, the Sibley Peninsula, that's a sleeping giant, okay, which is basically some mesas that look like a sleeping person. And we're talking about right there, Sibley Peninsula, zero in a little closer and a little closer yet. And we're talking about silver. Let's see here, these buttons are little. We're talking about Silver Islet, just a little touch down there. It just says Silver Islet, but you can't really read it, which is fine. And there's Silver Islet today. Because in the 1870s in Ontario, there were lots of mines. But why does anybody worry about this one? I can name some of the other mines. They never made it as big as this one. They certainly don't have the panache as this one. And I think, basically because it was under Lake Superior. And you look at the engineering feats that went into this, it's kind of phenomenal when you figure it was 150 years ago too. They mined down to 366 meters, 14 years in operation, made about $3 million in 1880 money, which is about $100 million today. So that's a rich mine. The other thing I think is that I think there's really some good evidence for some skullduggery at the end. And I'll explain why I think that's the case. And there's more work that needs to be done on this, but I think it's kind of interesting. Okay. Do I have to point this at something? Hello? You do the slide? This works this afternoon.
There.
There we go. Thunder Cape before 1924. In 1924, they took the lighthouse out of there and they put it on Trowbridge Island. And this is what it looks like today, Bird Observatory. I spent many, many nights out here. And the interesting spot about Thunder Cape, this part right here, the end of the Sibley Peninsula, is from that lighthouse, there's basically a rangefinder type lighthouse. You can see 11 lighthouses in Lake Superior. And from my estimation, I've sailed on Lake Superior quite a bit, I think that's it. I don't think you can find more lighthouses in the same spot anywhere on the lake. So this is not working. Okay, all right. So in the 1800s, Ontario was pretty wild. In 1850, the Robinson Treaty was signed, and that basically gave 104,000 square kilometers of land, primarily Lake Superior shoreline, to the Crown. And there it is. There's the map of what is covered. At that time, I thought they drove a hard bargain because they were going to get a salary of $4 a year. Well, back in the old days, somebody forgot to check the box saying this needs to go up every year. So nothing's happened basically. But in 2024, the Canadian Supreme Court says, no, we're gonna have to fix this. And so as you probably know, basically negotiations are ongoing. In the early 1800s, there were basically only paths and water paths. There were no roads. There were no towns. Fort William was there as of 1807, but it was kind of just an outpost. It wasn't really a town, as you could say it. There were some Hudson Bay people there trading furs and whatnot, but it was pretty wild. Between 1840 and 50, however, there were over 100 mining claims filed in this area, mostly covering copper mines. And because of the Keweenaw Peninsula south of that in Michigan was loaded with copper mines at the time. And they thought the copper would still kind of keep up here. In 1845, silver was discovered on Spar Island. And at that time, they start mining and looking for silver. So since that time, they've had the Thunder Bay Silver Mine, a few other ones on the islands, Spar, Thompson, Jarvis, Pile Islands. They all had very little silver mines, but none of them were very successful. Now, in those days, anyone that surveyed the land was granted patent by the crown. In other words, you could kind of do what you want here, type thing. So at the time, Ontario ownership owned the mineral rights also. There was some, so if you filed a claim, you had the property, you pulled the copper out of the ground, it was yours. There were some restrictions on gold and copper, on gold and silver, but basically the government wanted to open up the area for exploration. So much of the Sibley Peninsula was first surveyed in 1845 by a guy named Joseph Woods. Because Joseph Woods surveyed the land, it was named Woods Location. Now, Joe was an explorer. He didn't want to develop anything. So he ended up selling that land to the Montreal Mining Company, probably because they had additional holdings in the area. So they had a big tract, too. However, because it was so remote, the Montreal Mining Company kind of planted their flag in the area and sat on it for 14 years. Didn't do anything with it. So in 1868, the Canadian government decided to get tough with those guys and said, okay, no more Mr. Nice Guy. We're going to tax you on this acreage unless you start developing it. So they taxed it 2 cents an acre in the 1860s, which is about $1 an acre today. So you got to figure that at 500,000 acres, that's a lot of money for a tax every year in those days, $10,000, you know what I mean? Nowadays, it'd be about $450,000. That's real money. So a lot of the companies said, nah, we're walking away. Most owners walked away. But the Montreal Mining Company decided to survey the area and see if it was worth anything. So in May of '68, the Montreal Mining Company set out a survey party of 7 men on the yacht Algoma to see if they could pay the tax and let it go. The party was led by a Scotsman named Thomas McFarlane. And don't worry about all these dates and numbers and whatnot, you know what I mean? Just kind of listen to the story and, enjoy it. But McFarlane was born in Glasgow in 1834. He was educated in Scotland and Germany, became a mining engineer. He lived and worked extensively in Norway before moving to Canada in 1860. We're going to hear more about him later. In my opinion, he's got an underrepresented character in this process, but he's kind of an interesting guy. The party roamed up and down the shoreline between Fort William. No, that's McFarlane, sorry. Okay. Roamed up and down the shoreline. There's a map that he made in those days. Between Fort William and Black Bay, basically the northwest corner of Lake Superior. In July, they made it around Thunder Cape and start working near the present site of the Silver Islet town site. Now, on July 10th, 1868, 2 surveyors rode out to an 80-foot diameter rock in the middle of the lake. I've been here in July. There's bugs, mosquitoes, you know what I mean, flies. And it's like, we need somebody to row out the island. Pick me, I'll go, But they went. By driving a stake into the rock to set up the transit, they unearthed a vein of galena. Now, apparently, if you find galena, that's really good news because you're going to find silver. So they dug and they dug and they dug, and they pulled up some silver nuggets. Well, of course, this was big news. So, of course, they talked McFarlane and everybody came out there. The team came out there, set up a couple of black powder charges and worked bars and things as far as the lake as they could. And basically came up with a barrel of silver ore that was worth $1,200. Now, in those days, silver was about $20 an ounce. Now it's bumping $100 an ounce. But still, that was a lot of money in those days. According to McFarlane's account on July 15th, he sent a telegram to the Montreal Mining Company along with the silver that was extracted. They shipped it from Fort William to Montreal. Clearly, the Montreal Mining Company people were ecstatic. It's like, wow, we got something here. McFarlane did not go back to that mine at that time. He kept going up into Black Bay, and he found nothing else of note at that point. So in 1869, McFarland returned to Silver Islet and started working it as a open pit mine. He built a crib around the island, kind of artificial fence, artificial wall, I guess you could say, breakwater. It went down 13 feet deep, which is not very deep, really. And after the expenses, he removed enough silver to make a nice profit of $23,000. A lot of money in those days. Nowadays, you wouldn't pick it up, it fell on the floor. But in those days, that's a lot of money, you know. So McFarland proposed to the Montreal Mining Company, you give me $50,000 and I'm going to get this mine going for you. So the Montreal Mining Company is deciding what to do, come up with a 50K or abandon the site, okay? So news of a big silver find on Lake Superior, of course, piqued a lot of interest. And at that point, occasionally, interested parties visited the site. One of those interested parties was another one of our players, William Bell Frew. He was an Irish mining engineer working on copper mines in Michigan. He visited the mine site and reported back to his pal Alexander Sibley that we should do something about this. Now, Montreal Mining Company had just been burned by a $400,000 loss in a Bruce copper mine in Michigan. And ultimately, they decided to walk away, said, we just can't lose any more money. We're just not going to invest this money. So unbeknownst to McFarland, who was working on the mine in 1870, Montreal Mining Company sold 110,000 acres of land for $225,000 to Alexander Sibley and his partners, who formed the Silver Islet Consolidated Mining and Lands Company. And that's the start of the Silver Islet Mine. Alexander Sibley was born in Detroit, October 17th, 1817. He's the younger brother of Henry Sibley, who, you probably don't know, the first governor of Minnesota. And another brother was the mayor of Detroit. So those guys did okay for themselves. Now, a major player was William, this is Sibley, okay? And this is Frew. So William Bell Frew was born in Northern Ireland in 1830, immigrated to the US via New York. And he was 20, he left New York and moved to Michigan. We start mining in the copper and iron industries in the Keweenaw Peninsula. He made his name for himself in Michigan and soon found himself to be the superintendent of the Piwoschuk copper mine near the town of Atlantic Mine, Michigan. And of course, the mine is closed down now. The town of Atlantic Mine is still there. There's not an Atlantic Mine, actually, just the name of the town. In 1870, Frew was a 14-year-old mining genius, and he was a pal of Alexander Sibley. So Frew had his pick of jobs around the world. And he thought that he could really make his mark on Silver Islet. As an indicator of his prowess, Frew negotiated a salary of $5,000 a year for himself. That's the same as what Sibley made as the president of the company, which was really unheard of in those days. And put it in perspective today, that's about $125,000 a year today. So that was a nice tidy sum. He also negotiated a $25,000 bonus for himself if he mined $250,000 of silver ore in a year. Okay, so he's taking a little bit of a chance here, but that's worth $600,000 nowadays. So that's, real money too. The Silver Islet Company, unlike Montreal Mining Company, agreed to all his conditions and said, we're going to do it. So on August 31st, 1870, Frew showed up at Silver Islet with a crew of 20 horses and a crew of 34, 2 horses and tons of supplies to start building a huge breakwall and effectively an artificial island around this rock. So this is basically the original rock, and this is where they eventually built it out to. So it's expanded quite a bit. That was the first that McFarland heard that the Montreal Mining Company had sold the mine. So times being what they were, he signed up with Frew and went to work for the Silver Islet Mining Company as an assayer and sub-superintendent. Frew must have had a chat with McFarland, as he also proposed to Sibley, providing him with $50,000 and laborers to get the mine going. The company thought that was really ridiculously cheap, and they jumped at it and they did it. So they're going to invest the money to do it. Surprisingly, from September 1st until October 5th, 1870, in 35 days, they built a breakwater 140 meters long, 21 feet wide. And if you look where the breakwater is today, I've got some slides of this later, where it used to be, it's about 16 feet deep. So they built a wall 16 feet deep. Was it 5 meters? I don't know, sorry. So 140 meters long, 21 meters wide, and about 5 meters deep. They filled the breakwater with rocks and 300 tons of clay that was shipped from Michigan. And we know the breakwater is finished as they started to expand the mine pit on October 5th, and they start working on it. However, on October 26, 1870, a huge storm walked everything away, almost half of the breakwater, okay? The mine open pit was completely filled with rocks from the crib water that were the crib rocks that are around in that breakwater. Took everything out and plopped it back in the hole. But, me, I'd say, that's enough. I'm leaving. But they repaired it again. They had another huge storm on March 8th, 1871, and that really wrecked everything. But before that, they had another storm in December, which washed away 3,000 tons of rock. Okay. So even Frew was maybe thinking, maybe we want to reconsider. So he wrote to his pal Alex, when old Lake Superior worked herself into a fury and sea after sea came rolling in, heavily laden with ice, which battered down our works as though they were mere reeds. And it seems as though the water would surely succeed in regaining the whole of the lost territory and in driving its invaders from the ground. Okay. Periods were in short supply in those days. How do we know the exact dates? Okay. All of Frew's letters to Sibley have been preserved, and they're really interesting reading. I got some more quotes coming out of them too. I think he was kind of a little bit of a curmudgeon, which we'll hear about. So a quick word about Lake Superior storms. After the 1975 Edmund Fitzgerald sinking, there was extensive wave studies done on Lake Superior. Various universities really studied and trying to figure out what happened to the ship. And for various reasons, freshwater Great Lake storms are now thought to be more violent than saltwater storms. There's a whole bunch of reasons. I won't get into it because I don't understand them. But we know that Lake Superior waves can go 9 meters high. And then a Lake Superior wave has a frequency of every 10 seconds. Okay. A 9 meter high wave weighs about 400 tons. So figure a 400-ton sledgehammer hitting a wall every 10 seconds for hours and days and maybe a week. There's nothing left. There's nothing left. Navigation was open, so they logged much of the eastern side of the Sibley Peninsula and for timbers to rebuild the cribbing. And you can still see the forest differences between each side of the Sleeping Giant, each side of the Sibley Peninsula, because the other side was not logged extensively. In 1870, this is Silver Islet today. Oops, no, oops, am I getting behind here? Oops, what's going on here? Sorry, new technology. Yeah, that's Silver Islet today. But in 1870, living arrangements were really poor. Primarily semi-permanent tents or green log cabins. The green logs sweated incessantly in the winter. Winters in those days were, harder than they are now, I think. And of course, you don't have the technology and the heating, technology and those sorts of things too. They wet anything close to the wall. And also the wood they used for heat wasn't dried and really gave off a lot of smoke and creosote and hung around the cabin and this kind of stuff. However, by 1871, they did build a rudimentary town site. And that housed laborers, miners, and a few of their families. Finally, by 1871, November, they opened shafts rather than open pits and went down 27 meters and shipped $1 million in silver ore. Needless to say, Frew got a $600,000 bonus. Pretty happy guy. Now, Silver Islet ore was at that time the richest ore in the world. I have not been successful to find out if that's still the case. I just haven't figured that out. But the ore averaged $1,500 a ton. And the quality varied between $400 and $7,000 a ton. $7,000 a ton was at that time a world record. That's why we see the sign, the richest silver mine in the world. Okay, so you got this town out in the middle of nowhere, and you only get there by dog sled or boat. You want to get some people to work there. So staffing was an issue. So there were lots of miners were required, along with dozens of others, laborers, teachers, cooks, waitresses, spiritual leaders, perhaps a female entertainer or two, So how and where do you find miners willing to live and work at the end of the world? Okay. Their primary source were first Americans, primarily from the copper mines in the Keweenaw Peninsula, kind of right across the lake, which experienced a downturn after the Civil War. Those mines were all stopping. Nobody wanted copper anymore. By 1872, there were about 1,000 people employed by the mine or in support roles on Silver Islet. However, many miners, when they saw the conditions and actually what the job required, got back on the boat and left. I don't know about you, but this isn't for me. FRU is also against paying their fares to get there, writing, I do not approve of sending around to drum up men having to pay their fare to the mine. I look upon it as so much money thrown away. The men just brought into this country are worthless, both themselves and their employer. They get their ideas up and labor under the delusion that you cannot get along without them. But actually you can't. Well, finally, it came so hard to get workers, McFarland decided, I'm gonna go to Norway and get some Norwegian miners that he'd worked with before. Now, unfortunately, everybody knows about Norwegians except for FRU, okay? So FRU said this about Norwegians. The Norwegians arrived here, unfortunately, for since their arrival, he had constant trouble and vexation. You want to say, I've lost quite a number of the miners brought up here. In fact, I settled with them to get rid of them as they did not look upon their labor as profitable. Geez. So next, they're going to go to Cornwall and get tin miners that were all laid off too. So Cornish miners apparently weren't any better. 10 of them stole off the day after their arrival. 10 of them stole off the day after their arrival. The remainder all struck after one day underground. As to the reasons offered, there are as many as opposed to compromise as the quills on a porcupine. Poor board, foul air in the mine, the payment of passage money to these places. Besides these great evils, there were several minor objections, such as the fatness of the beef, the sourness of the bread, cold damp, loss of appetite, uncivility from the boarding bosses, and so on. That was the same letter that he put with his Norwegian letter to Sibley. So maybe he was just having a bad day or something. But like I say, he could have been a little prickly fellow. For your information, cold damp, I had to look it up. That's exposure to various mine gases. And there was methane and hydrogen sulfide in there. There was a couple of instances where the methane caught on fire until they could put it out. But nobody was hurt. Now, compensation for living at the end of the world, actually, it wasn't too bad. They averaged about $40 a month. And the rates were between 30 cents and $2.70 an hour. Room and board ran between $10 and $18 a month, depending upon their combinations. The company provided early socialized medicine, and each worker was assessed 60 cents per month for medical care, or $1 for your family. They also, being a safety and health guy, I was interested in this workers' comp part. They come with a rudimentary workers' compensation system by the Silver Islet Employees Benefit Association. You could buy into that plan for $1 a month, and it paid $5 a week if you were hurt, or $200 if you died for a death benefit. However, you couldn't file a claim for sickness or accident brought on by fighting, except in self-defense, wrestling, intoxication, debauchery, or misconduct. Jeez, that covers from debauchery? Wait. So I think that's interesting because that was 1872, and the Workers' Comp Act in Ontario was first passed in 1886. So they were kind of ahead of the game in a lot of ways. Now, surprisingly, and again, I don't mean this to be an all-inclusive, I don't know, I could have missed somebody, but surprisingly, I only located 3 minor deaths, which I think is pretty phenomenal too. None of them underground, all due to boiler mishaps. Something happened to the boiler and the boiler blew up, killed everybody. Now, in May 1873, they're down 70 meters below the lake level. In daily mining lives, they would wear these kind of hats with a candle on them, okay? And that was their light down in the tunnel. Now, of course, if you have a candle on your hat and there's methane, you're going to get a boom. And they did. But in those, now the methane would be up. So if the methane caught on fire, if they dove and hit the bottom of the tunnel, they're okay. And that's what they would do till the fire went out and they plugged the source of methane. They brought enough food and water with them to last the shift. Bathroom facilities were basically an empty blasting box full of lime. And that's what they used for the restroom underground. And then, of course, it was someone's job to, empty the boxes. Maybe that's a 70-cent guy. I don't know. They did have skip boxes attached to hoists in the shaft house to lift up the ore and drop supplies. But for the most part, people use ladders to get down in there. Ladders, I've got a story here about going down the mine. This is from 1883. Centennial is a Centennial newspaper, Thunder Bay Centennial. Centennial representative went through the mine and was shown the wonders of these wonderful excavations by a trusty servant of Captain John. It was near closing time when the bottom was reached and the blasting operations were in full swing. After a giddy descent on an almost perpendicular ladder of 1,592 rails, with water extinguishing your candle every 200 or 300 yards, and your fingers cramp with the ever-occurring grip of the cold, slimy bars of which the ladder is made, and the perspiration standing as beads upon your brow while the atmosphere is very suggestive of February. There's no account about how he got out, but this is in the newspaper. I assume he did. So think about that. So you're down that far, you got to come back up, you know? I mean, I used to be young and tough, but even I think this would have been daunting for me, you know? Actual mining was done pretty much by hand, and blasting powder, hammers, chisels, steam powered drills. You know, again, they would use those things a little later in the mine. And there's more documentation about those darn Norwegians, the one who stayed. They kind of irritated everybody else because they set off blasts without warning everybody. You know, and maybe they did, but nobody could speak Norwegian. I don't know, but you know, so water was a constant issue, and pumps were needed constantly. And Frew had to increase the size of the pumps. These are like basically Cornish walking beam pumps. They'd have a pipe that goes all the way down to the bottom of the mine, and various plungers kind of placed every 10 feet on the way up. So this thing would just pump constantly, pump water out back into the lake. And the pumps ran constantly, but were boiler failures and pump failures. They'd poke a hole in the bottom of the lake, et cetera, resulting in mine flooding. But it was always pumped out until the last time. And we'll talk about why that is. The mine flooding rates, believe it or not, there's a log that they kept of the mine flooding rates that I've seen, and I got a picture of it coming up a little later. The flooding rates varied between 10 feet per hour and a few inches per hour. So if you're down 1,200 feet and you got water coming at, 10 feet an hour, geez, I'm out. I'm out. Okay. Okay, here's like a little bit of a layout of how it ended up then too. You've got the shaft houses here, and you've got a spot for the tug to come in and the shipping thing to ship the ore out, bunkhouses, storage sheds, those sorts of things out there on that little Procable Island. Now, Frew was a law at Silver Islet. He was the boss. He was a Methodist believing in temperance. And at first, the only whiskey that was sold was dispensed by the doctor only for medicinal purposes. I don't think they do it anymore because I would have liked a shot yesterday, but they didn't give me any, nothing. Like, tough it out. Due to the many peddlers that showed up there from Fort William by a boat to sell whiskey was plentiful. So Frew decided to basically join them and sell whiskey at the company store. So workers are limited to 1 quart per week, and you could buy a quart of whiskey for 60 cents a bottle, but you could only buy it on Saturday night. So if you drink your whiskey on Sunday, okay, you're out of luck until the next Saturday. However, you could also buy a drink for 10 cents a drink in the company bar, and you could have 2, and if you behave yourself, you could have 3. So, it was pretty generous. Now, I think this is interesting. After room and board, medical tax, you got about $20 left over to cover your expenses. Oh, no, to put in your pocket, which is pretty phenomenal. Better than many other the mining sites I've looked at. You've heard the stuff about Old My Soul, the company store. Everything you buy costs about the same as what you make. That wasn't the case here. These guys could have retired or left with some money in their pocket. There was a jailhouse for rule breakers. Oops, backwards again. And that's a window in the cabin that's out there. Now, why the mine was successful, they expanded the island until it covered about 5 acres. Now, remember that it was 80 feet in diameter when they first started. Okay, that's a big expansion. You're talking tons and tons and tons of rocks, clay, hydraulic cement, building these walls and this kind of stuff. And, there's no dozers, there's no cranes. You know what I mean? There's shovels, picks, horses, mules, that's kind of how you're doing it. If you weren't housed on an islet, a tug would ferry the workers across for each shift. They mostly worked around the clock, 8-hour shifts, 6 days a week. But you had to work Sundays if there was an emergency. The mainland buildings included a stamp mill, which broke up the ore, an assaying office, shipping buildings, stuff related to the town, churches, things like that. But the thing that I think is really interesting is that in the mid-1870s, Silver Islet was a destination. Now, this is something I was amazed to find out. Sorry, I gotta sit down for a little bit. My arm's getting sore. This is heavy, you know. Jeez. It was a mining and a tourist town, and at one time the population was 1,500. For comparison, the Port Arthur population in 1880, the first one I found, was $1,200. Okay, for 1,200 people. Okay, so we're talking about a place that's bigger than Fort Arthur at that time. In the summer, there are often two steamships per day, bringing tourists in from Michigan and Eastern Ontario. Visitors came from all over the world to visit, swim, relax. They had hotels, you know, bars, things like that. They also had a school, pool tables, a local brass band. So life maybe wasn't too bad out there, you know, even though you're kind of away from it all, which is maybe okay. Two churches, a Methodist and a Catholic church. They're both gone. They both burnt down. But the Catholic church bell was relocated to the St. Agnes Church in the formerly Fort William section of Thunder Bay. It's up in the Belfry. Now, in 1874, there was big news. Frew invented the Frew vanner. A vanner is a machine that helps to separate the high and low value ore. So they'd bring these big chunks on land, these stamp mills, which are just big hammers. Can't hammer so much with this hand anymore, but you get the idea, breaking this stuff up. And then they'd run it through a vanner, and the vanner would separate the high and the low grade ore, and the other stuff would just get dropped off the end. His vanner was great. In fact, he built and operated 12 of them at Silver Islet. His vanner was so great that he decided to leave Silver Islet in 1875 to market his vanner around the world. There's a vanner. This is the last one left in the world. This is in Cornwall, England. And of course, it's just in a museum. But he got to be pretty successful. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes too. The next superintendent was a guy named Richard Trethaway, and he was born in 1835 and born in Cornwall, England, 1860s in the US, arrived at Silver Islet in 1871, took over from Frew in 75, and his brother John became the mining captain, kind of the underground guy. The guy's in charge of the stuff underground. Trethaway wasn't a wordsmith, and or his letters were destroyed. There's nothing about how Trethaway communicated with Sibley. Now, in 1875, 1873, they mined continuously and were down 366 meters. There's his resignation. So this is another side view of the Silver Islet mine. And remember too, this is not two-dimensional. It's three-dimensional. So there's shafts sticking out all over the place. They once tried to build a shaft over to Burnt Island, which is the one closest to Silver Islet, and see if they could find silver over there, but they did not. And then they sunk a shaft down Burnt Island, and again, didn't find anything down there either.
Slide whose resignation that?
Yes.
Could you just leave it up for a
Oh,
second?
sure.
Yeah.
Can you read it? I mean, that's not very clear, but okay. Want me to read it or does everybody see it? Okay. Dear sir, I beg herewith to tender my resignation of the management of the Silver Islet mine, the course to take effect on June 1st, 1875. In connection with the above, I must here offer my sincere thanks for the kindly manner in which I've always been treated, and for the assistance rendered upon me in my labors by yourself and the directors, and I leave the position with reluctance, but circumstances over which I have no control dictates and compel the adoption of the present course. Yours respectfully, William B. Frew. Okay, here's the mine kind of in disrepair. I've just got some slides here about the shafts and around. There is, right there, that is the two shafts you can see today. There's about 4 feet of water over the top of those shafts. And if you get right over them, you just look down 1,200 feet. It's pretty creepy, but it's really interesting. You can find this kind of stuff scattered around up there. And I've been to a lot of islands up there sailing. You see this stuff kind of all over. There's a big bolt sticking out of a log that was in somebody's driveway in Silver Islet. They're obviously kind of washed in from the breakwater. Here's kind of an aerial, not kind of, it is an aerial view. And you can see the shafts here. Oops. And you can see the breakwater here, okay, kind of goes all the way around. That stuff is all still there, but there's, of course, nothing in here. It's all gone. Another view of the holes. You know, like I say, it's interesting to go see them, I think. This is part of the breakwater too. Again, I apologize when I was out there, it's a little bit rough, but you kind of get an idea what's down there. And then this is you might have to start this from back here. That's a video clip. I can't turn it on from here, it seems like. You bring the cursor to the bottom. The province sent down an underwater drone a couple of years ago. There's a, yeah, you see the ribbon come up? There we go. Just, well, it's down, yeah, okay. It's about 30 seconds. This shows the condition of the cribbing and shows the ladder, you know, yeah. And I think they're down about 60 feet here. So you kind of get a little picture of, you know, there's the top. You look up, see the light, up towards the light. And that goes down 1,200 feet. That's a deep hole. I believe it was the provincial park group.
Canada.
Oh, it was Parks Canada. So that's national?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay. Parks Canada. All right. Oops. Okay. Just more cribbing underwater. You know, see stuff like that. Another view, a little bit better. You can see the breakwater a little better out here, these cribs. And we're going to talk about those cribs, what they were. And again, of course, the mine pits again, too. Silver Islet again today. Just kind of loose rocks, some trees, you know, those sorts of things. Kind of it. Okay, the end of the mine. This is how I really got intrigued to look into this. So why did the mine close? Okay. In 1863, they were mining and shipping ore like crazy, but the quality had fallen off. However, on July 21st, the Thunder Bay Centennial talks about a fabulous find. And I'm going to read it. Again, I think periods were in short supply. The Silver Islet Silver Mine has been from the time the first ounce of metal was taken from its cap, productive of more remarkable fluctuations than perhaps any mine in its age on the American continent. The operations there have always appeared to be a secret nature, and people living in this town almost invariably obtain their information in regard thereto from the New York press. It was rumored a few days ago that another rich find had resulted from 2 drifts, and the quality of the mine is promising, and it warrants the assumption of that great changes in the value of the stock would follow. Wow, sounds good, right? Wouldn't I want to invest in that? Even though it's a rumor? Well, people did invest. Okay. That fall, however, now remember, this is July. That fall, the John H. Tuttle steamship was supposed to deliver a 1,000-ton load of coal to power the boilers, but it never arrived. There's 3 reasons why. The crew didn't want to be stuck. The crew didn't want to be stuck in Silver Islet for the winter and took logging jobs in Michigan. The second one, the ship needed repair but frozen before it was completed. And the third one, my favorite, the captain of the crew partied a bit too hard, didn't live on time, and the ship froze in. This is the first line from Tanglefoot, One More Night. You can Google it on YouTube. It's an interesting song. And basically talks about, I didn't know that having a few drinks would cause that mine to die. Well, it did. Maybe all 3 were true, but the bottom line was the ship was frozen in Houghton, Michigan, never made it over there. The miners thought they'd be okay until the 1st of March, 1884, and rationed the remaining coal the best they could. However, once again, a big Lake Superior storm in March of 1884 required stepping up the pumps, and they ran out of coal. They burned driftwood, they started dismantling new sheds for wood, but it was too late. The mine flooded for the last time, and it closed. So that spring, almost everybody moved away, and the town was a ghost town. So I found at least 3 other instances where the mine shaft flooded, and every time they pumped it out. Why didn't they pump it out this time? Especially if there was a big strike of silver, right? Let's go do it one more time. We've been washed out of this place several times. Let's do it again. Silver Islet mining officials lamented that the mine flooded owing to the non-arrival of coal, unfortunately shipped in charge of an intemperate captain in the fall of 1883. And that was true. In fact, they sued the shipping company and were awarded $80,000. However, if we keep digging, we're going to see in 1883, the company, when it was reorganized after rumors of the big strike, they took an additional $6 million in stock funding. Okay, that's pretty good. So further investigation would show that in 1896, Archibald Blue and the Ontario Bureau of Mines director wrote, every dollar of the Silver Islet stock was fictitious. Fictitious. Yeah. So that was probably a front. Now, looking through some of the old newspapers, I did see in March 8th, 1884, the Silver Islet doctor published a note saying that he was leaving Silver Islet and moving to Thunder Bay. That's before the pump stopped. So did people know, time to get out of here, rats off a sinking ship. So was the 83 article a ruse? Was the mine running out of silver? We'll never know. But maybe not, because, this is the text of the mine flooding. We need to look at that now. Maybe because this is the Bureau of Mines report in non-arrival of the core from Houghton. Okay, yeah. So in those days, people mostly used this kind of a crib. And we saw those when we looked at that breakwater. It's a really constructed, strong crib made out of timbers. But in the Silver Islet mine, they did not use this because the roof was too heavy. So they left huge pillars of silver ore holding the mine up. So there probably is a lot of appreciable silver down there now. You know what I mean? But, won't know about that. Okay. Let's see. There were a couple of efforts to reopen the mine in 1927. In 1927, see what we're doing here? Good. In 1927, they actually went out there and pumped out a few levels, pulled out some silver ore, but it didn't really work out. They lost money, and that was the end of it. In 1960, 1970, 1975, there were rumors and people expressing an interest in that, but nothing ever came. That was the end. 1884 was pretty much the end. Okay. Currently, the mine and surrounding lands are covered by the Lake Superior National Marine Conservation Area. It covers a huge area from Thunder Cape over the town of Terrence Bay in 104,000 square kilometers. The plan permits hunting and fishing, but prohibits mining and the extraction of anything from the lake bed. So the mine is gone. It's closed, basically. Let's talk about the fate of our principals. William Bell Frew died January 17th, 1881 at age 51 of lung congestion, probably pneumoconiosis is what we call it now. He left a fortune due to the invention of the Frew Vanner to his widow, and he's buried there's his house in Detroit. It's no longer there, but that was his house. It's a nice place. And he's buried in Detroit. Sibley was born July 10th, 1878, and he died of age 60 of a stroke, and he's also buried in Detroit. Frew wrote Sibley a letter before he left the mine, stating that they'd both be moldering in their graves before the silver played out, which was true in a way, because they died before the mine closed. Now, Thomas McFarland, he's an interesting guy. He was truly a Renaissance man. Highly educated in science, music, and literature, spoke several languages. He discovered his own mineral called McFarlandite, and he went on and had a successful scientific career and published at least 49 articles. Those are the ones that are listed online that I could find on geology. And then he kind of got into food science. So he published papers on canned meat, tomato ketchup, honey, and milk. So, kind of an eclectic guy. Okay, some townside stories. There's an old cemetery. The records indicate that 79 people have been buried there, but a 1973 survey only found 59 graves. So, who knows? The first burial was in 1870, and the last one was in 1937. The markers are primarily wood, and many of them are surrounded by wood picket fences, but they're in poor repair. I took these years ago, and everything now is kind of like this. It's kind of falling apart. Oops. There we go. Kind of falling apart. Trees growing up everywhere and those sorts of things. There's 2 stone markers up there. I've only seen this one. The guy in 1937 has one too, but I don't know where it is. Ketty Ann McLean died February 10th, 1882, 10 days old during a typhoid epidemic. Her parents ordered the stone marker, but couldn't pay for it when it was delivered. And I've done a lot of checking. I'm pretty sure this is accurate. The marker was stored in the warehouse until it was discovered in 1963. And the townspeople organized a Ketty Ann McLean Day, held a service, and placed the marker in a pleasant spot of the cemetery. There's no information as where she actually may be buried. There's a little close-up of that with that tombstone. There were a couple of efforts to preserve the cemetery in the 1870s, and again in the 1970s, and again in the 1980s. but nothing was ever completed. They did the survey and there wasn't enough money to make it happen. So, okay. There were spooks in Silver Islet, allegedly. Okay. When I met the general store owners 2 years ago in April, the store was closed, but the bells by the front door kept ringing. And every time they'd ring, I turn around and look. And they're just kind of saying, yeah, I said, well, somebody coming in? Maybe. You know what I mean? We don't know. The owners had other weird experiences up there too. And that building has never burnt down. It's the original building from the 1870s. So there could be hauntings there. One of the Ghost Finder shows went there, and I don't know what they found, and I forgot the name of the show. But in 1982, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, like many of his contemporaries, were spiritualists. He visited in 1914 and then again in 1923. He held a seance first in the general store and then a house along the shore where a murder had taken place. Alleged murder, I should say. A miner's wife died by following her being pushed down the stairs. But there was no trial because the guy was drunk and he wouldn't have done it if he was sober. So, different times. Different times. There's no documentation of anything Sir Arthur Conan Doyle may have experienced, although there's an Arthur Conan Doyle museum I just located in England, and I just wrote to them to see if there's anything there. But there's no documentation at Thunder Bay, as far as I could tell. So a road was put in 1937, but to this day they're off the grid without electricity. Basically, solar, wind power, generators, kerosene, propane for power. I understand that Ontario Hydro wanted to put a line in there a few years ago, but the residents wanted it underground, and Ontario Hydro said no. So the townspeople said, okay, we're fine. We'll keep going the way we're going. There's lots of cabins there, old ones. You can rent a cabin on Airbnb, but they fill up fast. This is the store in the 1890s. You can see the Widow's Walk on top with barrels of water, except it looks like there's only like one barrel there now. The idea was if the roof caught fire, the barrels would, break and dump water on the roof. Here's how it looked in 1979 or 80, a little disrepair. And here's how it looks now. So they've done a lot out there. It's a kind of a tourist spot now. They got a tea room and they've got kind of a little area with the old pool table from the old days and ivory balls and those sorts of things. So if you ever been out there, it's worth a little day trip in the summertime. Currently, there's a few cruise ships that offer trips to Silver Islet as they anchor off Perry Bay near Silver Islet, primarily to see the town and the sea lion. Now, this is supposedly the sea lion, but the big head fell off about 100 years ago. So this is what's left. View from the water. Oops, I guess not as good as I thought that was. But just a big arch out there. Okay. I'm pretty well done. I'd like to offer a sincere thank you acknowledgement to the Thunder Bay Historical Society Museum. I really appreciate the effort. I've been here looking through files, fawns, pictures, newspaper articles, all that kind of stuff. The Thunder Bay Public Library, which has a wealth of stuff. They even got a secret stash in the back room that I had to give them my passport before they let me look at it to make sure they get it all back. Interesting stuff. And the Nanda Gakane Library at the Lakehead University. That's the old Patterson specialty library. And finally, Jeff Corkla at the Silver Islet General Store. Jeff's a great guy. Jeff and Stanley are great people. Stop in there. Tell him you know me. I don't think he'll spit in the floor, but you never know. Okay, here's my contact information. Oh, Jake's missed this one again. Here's my contact information. If anybody has any information or tips or knowledge, like you mentioned the Parks Canada, I appreciate knowing that. I'd like to hear from you very much. So, any questions? You ready for the quiz? There's no quiz. Yes. Oh.
Installed in situ back in either the late 20s or the early 30s.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
Should keep along.
Mm-hmm.
Strike.
Oh, I'd very much like to get a hold of me. I'd very much like to talk to you about it. Yeah, I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it's a good mine.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I appreciate if you get a hold of me. I'd really like that. Be good. Okay. Anything else? Aha.
One of my friends did research and Arthur Conan Doyle, second time here, did connect with the spirits.
Really?
Yeah,
Which spirit? I mean,
I don't know.
oh man, could you check with her again? I'd very much like to hear that story. You know what I mean? You know. Yeah, it is interesting. Anything else? Yes, ma'am. Oh, yep, sir. Oh, wait. Yes,
Care and control of that cemetery, and where are the records of people that died there?
I do not know. I think probably they went up with the church records when the church burned down. That's my guess, but I don't know. And I don't even know where the 79 came from, but that's what's published as far as the graves that were supposed to be there. One other tidbit, there were two spirit houses there, and before they started the cemetery, and that's why they think they put the cemetery on that hill. So, anything else? Oh, yes, sir.
Cemeteries, it's just inside the park boundary.
Yeah, I know that. So
Our Sleeping Giant Provincial Park.
yeah, and I thought it might have been carved up somehow, and if you need somebody else's care and control, but yeah.
Actually, in front of the cemetery, that field up there, during the mining days, it was a little golf course.
Okay.
Seriously, would you get a hold of me? The most you find. Oh, who? Mr. Black T-shirt, yes.
I've dove around the island and,
You dove around there?
yeah, what's amazing is that all the timber cribbing and the wood is like brand new.
Is it really?
The fuzz from the sludge and lake on it.
Oh, wow.
Some sort of slime, and then the wood is like, this look is just put there. And, swam over the shaft. And
Oh, wow.
down, and I know a couple people that might have went down it.
I've heard that,
And,
yeah.
It's all built in steps. So on a slope,
Mhm.
I was over top of it, 3 feet.
Yeah, it's really creepy, yeah.
The timber's like brand new.
Wow.
And,
Yeah.
I'd like to go back there and make a trip there, but I couldn't believe that wood's 150 years old.
Yeah.
It's like brand new.
It's pretty cold down there.
Here.
Oh.
On one of your slides, you showed an underground cross section of the tunnel.
Yes, the
And
shafts.
there's a white outline
Mhm.
under the surface.
Yes.
Did that represent where the silver was, or where were the veins?
No, they followed the veins, but there were lots of shafts. Okay, so they'd follow this one for a while, nothing here, and then go over here and they do this one. So that's what they did. They followed the silver. They did not just bore into rocks hoping they'd find something. They knew what they were looking for when they did it. Yeah. Oh, he's standing up. Is this gonna be a tough one?
You mentioned some recurring attempts to restart the mine, and you mentioned 1960.
Yes.
In 1960, I was the park naturalist in Sibley Park.
Really?
We had a number of Americans primarily coming through,
Okay.
all of them interested in what was going on at the mine.
Okay.
And I have to say, I formed the impression it was much more a stock development than a mining development.
Oh. Goes around, comes around. Interesting. I appreciate hearing that. Yeah.
Ichigumi.
Yes.
Hotel at Long Brown.
That's what I understand. Yes. Yeah. Now, how we ever heard about it, I've not been able to figure out. You know, how we heard about it. I don't know. Scott, there's one in the back there.
The parks haven't involved in that data. Short of the fact that it's within the marine conservation area, what's their interest in it? Is it just
No idea.
because they don't own
You
it?
know, sir? Why?
Why they put the.
Yeah, the drone down there.
It's just the conservation of it's privately owned, the mine.
Yeah,
The mine
yeah.
itself is privately owned,
Right.
but all the waters around it, of course, are
Yeah.
part of all of
So
it.
they were just interested in.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I can answer your question about how Arthur Conan Doyle got connected with Silver Islet. He shared him, he and Julian Cross, who was the son of
Yeah.
Captain James Cross, at any rate, they shared a medium together And that's how the two of them got connected, and the discussion of
that down.
Jules was very interested in the occult, and that's
Yeah.
how that connection was made, and the invitation was made to come to Silver Islet.
Was the
and
medium in Canada or England?
I think he was in England.
In England.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Property Thunder Bay as well too. That's why he's just did this.
Huh. Okay. Good to hear. Oh, sir.
They bore through that rock.
Well, picks, shovels, blasting powder. Originally, they would pound a hole into the rock, drop in blasting powder. This started even before they had dynamite. Blow the rocks apart and dig them out and see what's there. Later on, they did have steam drills, which would it'd work underground, and they had diamond drills too towards the end of the mine. So they steam powered diamond drills down there. You could do a lot more work than you could with a pick and a shovel. Yes, sir.
Is it granite or is that's all granite that they were looking?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know.
My other question was, is it visible, like with the silver been visible? You mentioned a mineral. I forget what
Yes.
it's called it.
McFarlanite. Yeah. The silver was visible. They actually got native silver out of that mine. And I skipped over a couple of those shots, but all those pictures of the silver wire and things, supposedly that was taken out of Silver Islet. I don't know. And there are museums around the country. So yeah, so you did see, so you could see silver, you could see silver nuggets, especially the really heavy stuff, $7,000 per ton. That's pretty heavy silver stuff. So
Much was pocketed.
that's an interesting point. Okay, if you lived on the island, if you lived on the island, you didn't get searched. But if you're going to go ashore, you got searched to see and make sure nothing fell in your pant cuff or your shoe. Now, I've heard stories that inventive miners would try and take a piece of silver and put it on a stick, float it into shore. And apparently I've heard that people, not so much now, but maybe 50 years ago, did find silver nuggets at the bottom of the lake by the beach there.
I was just wondering about, given the amount of copper on the Keweenaw Peninsula. Was any found this side of the lake at all?
Copper?
Yeah.
No, apparently after Isle Royale, it kind of stopped. You know what I mean?
But on the while they found some?
There's a lot of copper on Isle Royale, yeah. First Nation people have been mining there for thousands of years. And there's still, I've been on Isle Royale a couple of times. You can still find pits where they were working at. One of the things that I don't know, maybe somebody here knows, is that when you go up to a woods in an island someplace, where do you start looking? I mean, you know.
All those islands out there have big wide quartz veins on.
They do.
That's where they're looking. In.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
The shafts
Mhm.
at Silver Islet there's a quartz vein right there.
Okay,
Over at McKellar Island on the other side of the pie.
yeah.
There's a quartz vein that goes right through the island from one side to the other.
Oh, interesting.
Like 12 feet wide.
Oh, wow.
And it's the Thunder Bay side of the island, about 5 feet above the water, adit that goes in. Then about 20 feet around the corner, there's another adit. They actually go straight into the middle of the island, and there's another shaft under that island.
Seriously, I'm a killer.
It's filled in. I've been in the adit.
Mhm.
You could look up and see up to the sky.
Wow.
It's another, I think it was another 30 or 40 feet up.
Okay.
Wandered around on the island looking for stuff on there. But there's nothing left.
Okay.
I find the top of the shaft, but on the other side of the island, like the Isle Royale side,
Mhm.
very big white quartz, you can't miss it.
Okay, interesting.
That was the
Yeah.
time at Silver Islet. It's not as wide, but there's a quartz vein right
Yeah,
there. So they-
interesting. So maybe that's what you're looking for. You know, I showed a slide of some junk and stuff you can see around there. You know, there's still stuff up there. You know what I mean? Just some of the islands. We spent a couple of nights up in Black Bay, sailed up here from Ashland, and like every island's got something on it. It's kind of interesting seeing that stuff. And you can find like broken crockery. The water's so clear. Broken crockery down 10 feet down. You know, stuff like this. It's interesting.
Does anyone here know the story of how, and is it true that Sibley sold the peninsula to a family? And from there, all kinds of things happened, like the Provincial Park.
I don't know. I don't know anything about that. Obviously, the provincial park, I think, came online in 48. So it's seriously.
They have, family kin still there.
Oh, interesting. Wow. You did? Okay, all right.
You go back.
My cousin James and I here were great-great-grandchildren of Captain James Cross, who's one of the miners out there. So,
How about that?
and a couple of his sons, who one of them ran a fox farm out there, and the other
Oh,
one
yeah.
was a mining explorer. He wasn't as trained as his younger brother Julian was, but he was a explorer as well too. They did quite well, and they ended up buying a lot of the land in the lower peninsula.
Okay.
So the lower third, more of and that was what was part of the creation of the park in 41, I believe. It was during the war, and it was really the business people of Thunder Bay that wanted a park close by for
interesting.
people to enjoy. So the family, the Cross family, who still owns the mine itself and a few other islands and mineral rights as well, including a little bit of mineral rights in the park themselves still. They sold it to the government.
Interesting. Yeah. It's a beautiful park. I don't know if I've been there dozens of times, over the top of the giant, on the head, all over the place. My younger days, nowadays I have to have somebody carry my pack and probably carry me too. But other than that, it's a beautiful place. It really is a nice park. It's really one of my favorite spots in the world.
One area has never been touched, and no one's allowed on it. And it would be nice to see the Lakehead University and the archaeology team out to see even just a scan. And I won't tell you where the area is,
Okay.
but.
Tell Scott. I'm not gonna go look,
No. But there is one area that's pristine and not been ever touched.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah. Huh. How about our Silver Islet friends over there? Any comments or? I'm talking to you guys. Okay. Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your attendance. Yeah, we can put that stuff. Yeah. Oh, wow.
All right, well, thank you for joining us this evening. We hope you enjoyed tonight's lecture. I encourage you to join us again for the upcoming events you saw on the screen as we got started this evening. And if you'd like to continue supporting the museum, please consider becoming a member. Membership not only helps sustain our work, but also provides you with the valuable benefits like tonight's lecture. On your way out, don't forget to stop by our gift shop and to explore books and to leave items related to our history. Before we close, I'd like to express my sincere thanks to those who helped make this evening possible. Linda jumping in and helping at the front desk. Michael DeYoung, who's down at the front desk and should be bringing up refreshments shortly. And Mary Jane back in the back. And I'm seeing a hand to help plug the art exhibit down on the second floor. Don't forget to check out the Silver Islet in plein air exhibit down on the second floor. Lovely paintings of Silver Islet. And I also want to thank our sponsor, the Department of History at Lakehead University, for their generous support. To our corporate members, Equipment World and Woodland Heritage Northwest, and their commitment to our work is deeply appreciated. And finally, thanks to all of our other volunteers who work behind the scenes and to keep our mission alive. So the refreshments should be up here shortly. And thank you for joining us this evening, and wish you an excellent rest of the evening.